Yeah, there it is.
Never trust another paint to be a Benjamin Moore color.
Knowing how to tell authentic is as easy as 1, 2, 3. Find it, match it, search it. Step 1. Find the style number on the tag. Step 2. Match the style number inside the jersey with the number on the tag. Step 3. Search it. A quick Google search of the style number will verify the jersey is authentic when the search results match the jersey being searched. Don't be fooled by counterfeit jerseys. Before you buy, remember to find it, match it, search it.
Fan Zone, 2 locations nationwide. Center City Mall, Chaguanas and Movietown, Port of Spain. Nationwide delivery available.
Are you driven, ambitious, and ready to earn? WESN, the content capital, is expanding, and we're looking for dynamic media sales executives to join our team. Sell powerful advertising solutions across television, digital, and social media platforms, and help brands tell their story. If you have strong communication skills, a passion for sales, and the drive to succeed, join WESN today. Send your CV to marketing@wsncc.com or WhatsApp 6861662 and start building your future.
WESN.
Good morning. Just another sunny day in what should be paradise, depending on your point of view. Allow my cynicism this morning. I'm sure Michael Small. This is talking about the WSN, the content capital, and I didn't necessarily dive deep into the situation in Guyana and what happened with the boat capsizing. And now the reports indicate that the most likely culprit or reason for the tragedy, based on what is known so far publicly, is that the boat was probably overloaded. This is a situation that has caused, and I'm thankful for it, local stakeholders to perhaps bring up the conversations with regards to how we operate various commercial boating arrangements in similar manner, particularly with regards to Tobago reef tour operators, because it can be said potentially similar situations happened on a smaller scale last year, as well as with regards to the regional ferry service. Because the whole concern, of course, is when you have people playing fast and loose, and you have too much of a complacent attitude. With regards to a boat, as one local stakeholder in Tobago said, you can't play with boats. And the point of no return, it's too late. You can't just offload people in the middle of a sinking and somehow it'll be better. The thing is, when it has happened in Trinidad that local watercraft, again, for reef tour or party boats in Tobago, when they sank, these were not of the same size. And again, according to a local operator, or not a local operator, sorry, because I don't think they operate glass bottom boats, but a local stakeholder said, you know, we've been lucky so far. Once again, God is a Trini, or in this case, a Trinbagonian, to fully flesh out the phrase. And it has highlighted the fact that this is another area where we have legislative holes that needs to be filled This is one of the areas that I do believe the THA is looking into. Of course, we do have to question, with regards to Trinidad, with regards to the boat charters down the islands and the party boats, while I appreciate the fact that for the most part, the operators seemingly act responsibly with regards to how many people they have on their boat and so on, the flip side to that is it's not whether the operators can be responsible even if they don't have any formal regulations. It's will that be maintained when new operators come on the scene, when someone takes over their operation. Because that's the issue, I think, that you see, at least in Tobago. People could follow the rules, and then after a period of time, somebody is going to get a bright idea in their head. Because there's a certain degree of hustle when it comes to these kind of things. Recreational boating is not a necessity. I don't need to buy it every week. I don't need it to eat my meals every day. I don't need it to charge my phone or provide me internet service or provide me clothes to wear. It's a complete luxury. So it's easy to see, particularly in how that industry operates in Tobago, where it's a very competitive and difficult field. You're going to try to get as many customers as possible and then potentially succumb to the temptation of putting too many people on a boat. Because you're just there to get butts in seats. You're not necessarily concerned that there's not enough seats and this thing ain't going to float. Now, interestingly enough, this brought up questions with regards to the regional ferry service. And I'm not necessarily as concerned with regards to the regional ferry service, at least not to the same extent, because with all of the issues that we've had at times with our ferry service, one of the issues I don't think has been overloading. So when you have a larger scale operation that's more professional and digitized, it's not so easy for one or two people to just be irresponsible and fast and loose, right? There's a certain amount of tickets. Once the tickets are done, the tickets are done. I've never heard of anybody, and I'm not saying that it is impossible, but I do not think this happens. I've never heard of anybody being given a bly. Help me out now, I need to get to Tobago, and you have like an extra 20, 30 people that shouldn't be on the boat, or however many it might take to really overload it, right? Obviously, the vehicle capacity, it's designed for it, and we've had full boats, and seemingly our ferries, they could stand up to that kind of capacity. And I think any regional ferry service would be at a similar level where it won't be so easy to make such mistakes. The only thing, though, is there's a question with regards to the passenger manifest on the Guyana boat that capsized. Now, part of it is they're saying that there seems to be more people, more bodies recovered, and those bodies are not listed on the names of the manifest. And I could be wrong, because it's been a while, but when I would travel to Tobago via the ferry, and that was a while ago now, I don't think I ever remembered giving my name. So while it might seem like a small thing, they will have a proper head count because, again, number of tickets sold, this is all, I would imagine, automated. But would they necessarily have like a full named list, which will then make it easier to track in case there's an incident? So that's the only area of weakness. Of course, if you then look to have a proper full manifest, because that's basically what an airline flight has, right? You don't just have a ticket, it's to your name. Now, that's part of that is for the commercial security, so there's no fraud. No one steals your ticket and takes your flight. But it also provides a proper tool in case there's in case ever there's an emergency, you could track everybody. You could ensure that, hey, this is who we have, these are their names, and we have confirmed by name each individual, whether they survived, whether they were hurt, whether something unfortunate happened to them. And of course, our inter-island ferry service has a lot more passengers than the inter-island air bridge. So that's the only area of weakness that, especially if it is a regional ferry, because there'll be more time spent at sea in between islands in deep waters. This goes back to what I said. If we want to have a regional ferry service, even though I'm more confident in an operation like that being safer than, say, some fly-by-night local small craft, relatively speaking, smaller than a ferry. Incidents can still happen at sea. Usually when they happen to our ferry service, it's around the north coast of Trinidad, somewhere in that proximity, or it might be in close enough proximity to the harbor by Port of Spain, or the harbor in Tobago, and if we're really unlucky, it'll be in between the islands, right? But it's still within proximity of Trinidad and Tobago. If we need to respond to an emergency, it is well within the realm of possibilities, our capabilities, just because the distances involved are not as complex. A regional ferry service will have situations where perhaps, in case there's anything that happens, it'll be a little bit more complicated. And it doesn't have to be the boat breaking down. It could be a medical emergency on the boat. Now, the last time we had a report about a medical emergency on the boat, fortunately there were doctors on the boat. You can't necessarily take that for granted. This is one area where perhaps we should also, or could also do better with regards to some kind of emergency plan. I don't know, once it gets too far close to Togo, now it gets very, very difficult unless you have a Coast Guard vessel in the port of Scarborough that could rendezvous to help perhaps retrieve anybody that needs medical attention. But will it be faster than the ferry? Could you have an airlift situation in case of an emergency? I don't know. We might not have the financial resources for that. But all of those questions become compounded and more complicated when you go regional, because again, the distances involved. And this is one of those things where if you're trying to encourage a new product that the region is not accustomed to, you don't necessarily then want to have, yes, I know that we've had ferries before, but I would imagine this is something that you would want to scale if successful. You don't want incidents that will then limit the scaling, because there will be a certain amount of people who will be wary about taking the boat. There's already a certain amount of people that just refuse to take the ferry to Tobago. Right? Fortunately, it's not that serious for them. They could fly. So this is something that we need to look at, but also I feel questions should be asked and answered with regards to what is the laws governing all sorts of commercial watercraft activity, but more importantly, who is enforcing said laws, if any exist? How are they being enforced? What is the practical capacity to enforce them? And what is our capabilities to respond to any emergency at sea? And I think the temptation is to not have to deal with it, because then that's an extra expense. Who's going to bear it? The government? The party boat operators? The party boat operators don't want to do it. That's going to cut into their margins. The government doesn't want to do it because they rather spending money somewhere else. So, but this is, I guess, the difference between an underdeveloped country and a developing to developed country. What do you have in place to safeguard your citizens, to afford them the luxuries of having recreational boating experiences? And we're not talking buying a boat for everybody, but rather, as a government, to provide the services that private citizens can't provide themselves, and that is to say, the extension of emergency services to now cover maritime activities. I am not entirely sure to what degree that's being done, because I'm not even confident that we have an ambulance service, to be honest, to respond to emergencies in a proper, professional, and consistent manner, whether it's a car accident or an incident at a house fire, what have you. Right? We have private ambulances, but I find that kind of incredible that our emergency responses to any medical emergencies is predicated on private ambulance services. And it's not like response times in this country is something that we're known for. Or we're known for it, I guess you could say, yeah, the entire population knows not to rely on those response times because it takes too long. So, much less to say, what if there's an incident at sea? All you need is one to ruin an entire industry. I mean, the situation in Tobago has somehow survived, but again, as one stakeholder said, it's because we've been lucky so far. Now, just touching on the data center issue again, apparently there was, I don't know if somebody found documentation for a previous project that the opposition chief whip then spoke about, basically to say, look, somebody wanted to test the waters for a data center back in 2022, which the PNM did not move forward with because said individual only wanted to benefit from the water and electricity subsidy. Now, not entirely sure if it was an AI data center all the way back then, or if it was just a data center. And the size, I'm not entirely sure what the size, scope, scale of the project was. As far as I am aware, this whole thing about AI data centers much later in time. 2022 might be a bit too early. But I believe the Minister of Artificial Intelligence, he went on to say it was a project that was initiated under the former government to provide secure data storage and digital services for the government, which, that makes sense, right? That makes sense. The question, of course, again, is what scale we were looking at. The tier 4 part of the scripture he went on to explain was referring to the reliability and resilience of the facility, which if the then government wanted secure data storage and wanted to use that facility to be the servers to essentially physically locate a lot of the infrastructure for digital services, you want it to be reliable. You don't want it to go down. You want it to have a certain amount of capacity. You want it to have a certain amount of hardware, I guess you could say redundancy, efficiency. Of course, and that goes into a whole other, it's not like you could do it any cheap, and then if power goes down, you say, oops, we have to wait for TNTEC to come. No, these are the kind of things where you would have to have built-in generators and plans in case there's any sort of accidents, what to do in case there's a fire, etc., etc., etc. So, apparently people are thinking, oh, there's already been a project initiated. That seemingly is not the case. I just wish the minister, the way I always said it, it almost makes it seem as though there is a project, if you're not careful reading it, makes it seem like there is a project that was initiated in the PNM, and we're not, we just didn't bring it up. But it's not our project, it's their project. And it makes it sound as though, because he just says initiated. And I don't think he necessarily goes on to say initiated, but not actually proceeded with. And hence the chief whip had to come and speak about it. The Prime Minister, she is saying that the low murder figures is an indicator that the state of emergency is working. I would say that's a lot of political hogwash, to be honest. That implies either one, the Prime Minister, if she has awareness of how these things actually work, she's just trying to find something to give the public to placate us, or she is completely oblivious to how these things work. Because a state of emergency, this is the thing. So the implication of the statement is, we will be under emergency powers until she leaves office, and then it's someone else's problem. But the state of emergency, I don't think anyone will have a reasonable interpretation of our laws that governs a state of emergency. And the takeaway is that, yes, this is more than within the boundaries of what was intended. I don't think there's any reasonable take to say having a state of emergency in the manner that we are having it in. Not that Parliament has continued to extend the one state of emergency, but to have these very, very, very disingenuous rolling states of emergency situations potentially. I don't think anyone is going to say, oh, that was well within the expected usage of the legal framework when it was designed. Because if that's the case, why bother having a clause that goes on to say if you want to extend the state of emergency a second or third time, you need a higher majority? No, that was you need to really be in an emergency, and if the opposition disagrees with you, we're going to end it here. Lo and behold, they circumvented that in I would argue, a very obvious way. Perhaps maybe the framers of the law either purposefully left the loophole in or did not think that a government would resort to kindergarten-type logic, but it is what it is. Yes, the murder rate is down. There is literally absolutely nothing to indicate that the murder rate is down in a way that is sustainable outside of emergency powers. There is nothing in the history of man to indicate that long-term emergency powers is beneficial to a democratic free society. The Prime Minister was rather proud of the fact that we are not a communist dictatorship, we are a democratic free society. She says this with a straight face while, to some extent, our rights has been suspended. She says that, apparently, with no expectation to alleviate the fact that we are living with our rights suspended. And when we wanted someone to solve the crime problem, solving the crime problem should not have been, well, I'll just use a state of emergency so we could shortcut everything. This is a situation where, I mean, it looks extraordinarily lazy to me. And let's not forget that the Prime Minister is saying that the state of emergency is working. The Minister of National Defense, Wayne Sturge, he said, a state of emergency is not a crime plan. So the thing is, while I appreciate the fact that the state of emergency is suppressing the murder rates, the key word of the day is suppressing. As far as we're aware, if the government, here's the thing, now I've said this repeatedly, what is the plan, what is the changes they're making, what are they doing while they have the state of emergency to make it sustainable? Now usually, I'm alluding to changes in legislation, I'm alluding to maybe setting up, because changes in legislation, that's a long-term thing, so you need something in the short term. State of emergency, short-term measure, right, that will bridge the gap, get you to the long term, limit the amount of people that might become victims of murders or other violent crimes. Cool, no problem with this. But we could go a step further. We could go a step further. If the state of emergency allowed the police to then have an easier time gathering evidence to charge criminals so that the permanent solution of convictions can be experienced, can be initiated. That's sustainable because we get them off the streets by the actual proper process in a manner that is going to stick, that is not going to have a major hole in it. And that is the major hole of the preventative detention order, in that if we can't charge these people without the state of emergency, we will be compelled at some point in the near future to let them go. We are only holding, and they have not, because here's the thing, if they were charging all of the detained, alleged suspected criminals, I would imagine they would have a press conference and announce it to the world. But they haven't. They haven't given us such an important piece of good news. So I think it's reasonable to assume, given the reluctance to reveal the ratio of how many detainees under PDOs have been actually charged, which is therefore an indicator of how many people they've actually been able to do real police work on, get evidence for, and proceed with criminal prosecution. They haven't revealed those numbers. Why? Because as far as we know, the little information that we have been given implies that a significant majority of the detained have not been charged. So exactly how is the state of emergency really working in the long run? And this is where perhaps I'll be cool with it if Prime Minister Kamala Persad-Bissessar was financially liable for all of the lawsuits coming from the state of emergency. I'll be cool with it. If her Minister of Homeland Security, her Minister of National Defense, her Attorney General, her Commissioner of Police, they were all financially liable for the state of emergency, then I won't have a problem with it. Because the consequences are not going to be borne by her. It's not even going to be borne by the UNC. It's going to be borne financially by us. And you might say, oh, well, they're citizens too. Yeah, they're not bearing the financial consequences. You only need one term in office in order to be set for life, right? Lord only knows what that means. But we, to some extent, know it's true. The Prime Minister argues had the PNM remained in office, there would have been 400 more murders. That's cute, except they started a state of emergency and the murder rate started to drop long before. But let's not talk about inconvenient things. No one ever accused the current administration of being logical. Murders have declined. How are you going to sustain it? All you have is a state of emergency to threaten criminals with. A fragile situation at best, because now I guess I have no idea how the Privy Council is going to rule on these matters, but they are a final court of appeal, and I would imagine all of it will get to them at some point or another, unless they're discontinued, right? We will never see a situation over the state of emergency reach the Court of Appeal and not go to the Privy Council. Because right now it's the government versus the Hadids. And both sides has, I believe, enough financial means in order to see this thing through. Now, the Privy Council might, depending on how they view their own laws and their own culture, impart or interject that on our situation, in which case that will bring up the whole question about moving on to the CCJ once again. But perhaps they won't, because they do look at our laws. So we don't know how they're going to interpret things. But there is a not small chance that this whole SOE regime, because that's what it is now, it's an SOE regime, is going to come collapsing down based on a court ruling, because again, I don't think anybody could reasonably say that what the current government is doing is within the spirit of the law, the intentions of the laws for state of emergency. And I do find it extraordinarily interesting, because Basil Opande will go down. His legacy is going to be in part what happened with Piarco, which is not in the grand scheme of things, especially now in hindsight, saying what we have now, that bad apparently, if you're grading him on a curve, right? And of course, his legacy will include his general time in office, the 1818 situation where Robinson did not pick him, and him holding on to power in the UNC. Not necessarily a great start. Eric Williams' legacy will include all of the bacchanal of the PNM from back then, but it will also include the fact that he was the guy there, much to the chagrin of whoever that doesn't like him. He was the guy there that started the country. Believe it or not, things could have been worse. I don't know what to tell you. So on some level, there will always be a minimum level of appreciation being attributed to him, whether he is liked or disliked. Mr. Manning, of course, he has the waterfront, but then he also has the legacy of what led to the snap election and him being voted out of office so unceremoniously dropped by his own party. And of course, the consultations or the discussions or the talks with community leaders and what started with that initiative. And Mr. Robinson, of course, has the economic situation at the time in the 80s that led to the coup. But I think on some level, the legacies of those gentlemen, they are what they are. You could say they come with the good and the bad. But right now, when we look at the last two prime ministers, the legacies aren't that great. I think for the most part, Dr. Keith Rowley wanted to have a legacy project, and he's not going to be remembered for that airport in Tobago, to be honest. He's just not. He's just not. It's not like what Piarco meant to the country. And dare I say, how it was done was a lot more, I don't know. I don't know how to describe it. The whole thing seems like a complete waste of time, to be honest. Right? Tourism is nowhere near filling that 3 million visitor quota. And then, of course, there's also the legacy of how his time in office ended. And I would argue the controversy with regards to the succession of his party, the controversies around his administration in the last couple of years of his time in office, and even to some extent how COVID was handled, at the least in the back half. All of that's going to impact his legacy. But dare I say, it will still look better than the legacy of ruling by a state of emergency. This is now Kamala Prasad-Bissasa's legacy. Not the Children's Hospital, not any initiative that she's going to, no, this is going to be her legacy. More than anybody else, she's going to have this one thing that's going to stand out like a sore thumb, that's going to override anything she has accomplished. It's going to be the fact that she inflicted this on a population to achieve what? Now, if it was to achieve long-term reductions in crime, then fine. But she herself essentially admitted it indirectly when the previous state of emergency ended, saying, behave yourself or I will call another state of emergency. Which means they did not have anything in place to enforce the status quo of reduced murders. She knew, and perhaps they wanted it that way because they needed a state of emergency to get the PDOs back. Or perhaps they knew without the PDOs, the murder rate will inevitably climb again. So it's only a matter of time before they have to reinitiate it because they just don't have the capacity to do actual policing and law enforcement without it. And I do find it rather ridiculous that the police want to do anything within the realms of saying, look how successful we are. You're not successful because you're good at your job. If you were good at your job, you wouldn't need a state of emergency. That's not how this works. You can't say, look at us. Look at us, we got the cheat sheet. We took the shortcut. Look how great we are. We broke records. That's like if Usain Bolt ran 60 meters instead of 100. Oh my gosh, he got the record for 100. Yeah, he didn't run the whole 100, did he? He took a shortcut. That's like if someone had a shortcut that ran halfway through a marathon. Look how fast they are. Yeah, they got to the finish line faster. That's what a state of emergency is. Because here's the thing. When boat operators take a shortcut to commercial profits, you potentially get overloading and the boat capsizes and people dies. When you take shortcuts in law enforcement, you potentially have innocent people getting caught up in the nonsense, a further potential expression or capacity for corruption, and people do get hit. And while I am not necessarily going to say that the police have displayed unprofessional behavior to that extent during the state of emergency, at the same time, we also are living at a period where trust and confidence in the service is at an all-time low. One could argue trust and confidence in the leadership of the police is starting to fall precipitously over the last 7 months. And how can we then continue to have faith that emergency powers are not going to be abused the longer it goes on, when we saw a video of a man with his hands up being shot to death? And no attempt to explain to the population what happened and why, how they're handling the situation is the correct way to handle it. It's a very autocratic way to rule. It's almost as though we're a communist country. And the irony, of course, with the Prime Minister saying that we are a free democracy, she does not operate her own party in that way. And when we had the election, I basically said, well, I use the phrase benevolent dictatorship. Well, I guess that only lasted for so long. This is the party that allows absolutely no dissent. This is the party that does not tolerate anyone breaking the ranks for any reason, on any opinion. I guess you could say it shouldn't be surprising that we have protesters being locked up and people being potentially prosecuted for empty threats. But also, it comes back to what I said yesterday. When political loyalty is your most important attribute, and that's how you get ahead in your organization, that means you're not selecting for ability. You're not selecting for intelligence. You're not selecting for integrity. You're not selecting for outside the box or innovative thinking. You're not selecting for work ethic, energy. You're not selecting for anyone having a sense of responsibility or displaying abundance of consideration or compassion for the citizens. You're not selecting anyone with good communication skills. You're not selecting anyone with the capacity to understand and relate to and communicate with the people on the ground. You are merely selecting yes men and yes women. That's all you're indexing for. That's all you're looking for. That's all you are hiring. We don't have a cabinet of experts. We have a cabinet of yes people. Even Attorney General John Jeremy is slowly chipping away at his own legacy, to be honest. What it will be at the end, I have no idea. But some version of the word disappointing is probably going to be utilized. And it's not to say that the disappointment in him is going to be some grand, unique thing. Oh my gosh, but look how bad he was. No, it will be more along the lines of, why did we expect more? Why did we expect something new and different from someone that's been here before? Did he necessarily display all of the things that we would want from a holder of high office to make them a great leader? Because all of the members of cabinet on some level should be leaders, but they're not leading, they're following. They're following someone who does not allow for dissent. And they're following someone that, quite frankly, seemingly has no real ideas. Because so far, one could argue that everything the government has done has been uninspiring, basic, simplistic, for the most part what the PNM did before. While they criticized the PNM doing those things, the one exception is the state of emergency. We don't know if the PNM would have ended up in this pattern of continuing a state of emergency in such a disingenuous manner. I would hazard a guess, though, that if the PNM did it this way, then opposition leader Kamla Persad-Bissessor would have gone on a high horse and said, this is undemocratic. And that person would have been right. So, I don't want to hear it, to be honest. I don't. Because when the Prime Minister says that the murder figure shows that the SOE is working, again, it's either a disingenuous statement meant to oversimplify a situation to mamagayu, or it is a revelation that she is not thinking deeply on this issue. That they don't have any real long-term plans, or they don't care to have any real long-term plans. And at the end of the day, to be honest, and this is the sad part, when people say, I miss Fitzgerald Hines, it's not that I agree with them that he's a better Minister of National Security than anybody they have with a national security portfolio. It's just that at this point, we gained nothing. We gained absolutely nothing. We have a criminal defense lawyer, don't know what he really knows about national defense. We have a former police officer that does not know how to act like a politician who's supposed to oversee the police. And we have another guy with a ministry that is often forgotten. And then we have the AG, who potentially is having to oversee the intelligence services of the country because all of the ministers with national security portfolios potentially are not good enough for international partners to trust them. There's too many unfortunate connections or skeletons in their closet from their history, from their backstory. This is a claim that the government, as far as I'm aware, have not refuted. If they have, I would stand corrected if they have anything of reasonable substance. Which implies to me that there's at least some level of truth to it. I'll close with this. The nurses are threatening legal action from the NCRHA, the North Central Regional Health Authority, because shifts have been, well, this is kind of ridiculous in my mind. 4-hour shifts. I am surprised they are giving the NCRHA the courtesy of an advance warning. And again, I have no issues with the Nursing Association because they have been complaining about things since COVID. They have been complaining about things when it was red. They are complaining about things when it is yellow. This is one union where I do not think their complaints are centered around politics. If anyone wants to imply that, you need to come with some good evidence for me to believe it at the very least. I also do not have very much faith in the leadership of the NCRHA, that he knows how to actually manage a situation like that. It is what it is. But it's fine. It's fine. It's not like a lot of the population depends on the national public health system in order to facilitate a significant amount of their healthcare needs. Nothing to see here. It's fine. It's not like we have a nursing problem to begin with. It's not like we potentially have an ongoing issue of nurses leaving the country for better opportunities elsewhere. It's not like even if we could retain our nurses, we still would have enough to meet demand. It's fine. Why don't we just abuse the people who we've been putting abuse on in order to keep the health system running? That makes sense because we need to find the money. Obviously, PSA workers deserve all the money in the world, but nurses don't deserve, I don't know, proper staffing levels so that then you could avoid the bloody overtime that you don't want to pay. Because it has not been reported that they have achieved the staffing levels necessary. So Lord only knows how that wage situation is working. Is this 4-hour shift a means to try to circumvent any sort of rule of law with regards to overtime pay? I have no idea. All right, let's take a break. When we come back, hopefully, we will switch gears and get more technical with the legal part of 2 of the stories from the last week. Stay tuned. This is Talking Point on WESN show. Michael Small. We'll be right back after this.
Maybe he landed here totally by coincidence. But if by chance he's admiring your fresh coat of Benjamin Moore soft sky blue, well, that's a pretty high compliment. Coming from an expert.
Take some time for yourself or spend some time with the family at Sandy Point Village Hotel. Enjoy our various studio and suite apartments, self-contained with their own kitchenettes and Wi-Fi. We also have our famous 100-foot swimming pool and our beachfront restaurant, the Steak and Lobster Grill. And our location in Crown Point puts us near the center of activity from the nylon pool to the local nightlife. Call us and make your reservations at 639-8533, 389-2378 or email us at sandypointvillagehotel@gmail.com.
Knowing how to tell authentic is as easy as 1, 2, 3. Find it, match it, search it. Step 1. Find the style number on the tag. Step 2. Match the style number inside the jersey with the number on the tag. Step 3. Search it. A quick Google search of the style number will verify the jersey is authentic when the search results match the jersey being searched. Don't be fooled by counterfeit jerseys. Before you buy, remember to find it, match it, search it.
Fan Zone, 2 locations nationwide. Center City Mall, Chaguanas and Movietown, Port of Spain. Nationwide delivery available.
In this day of stay at home and work from home, home has never meant more than it does today. Whether you're looking to buy, rent or build your new home, now is the time to get going. Gittins & Gittins real estate agents are here to take you to that place of your dreams. Let us take you home. We help you find that rental to rest along the way or journey with you to find your home destination. Investors and commercial enterprises too, call us and we'll walk the distance to place your business in just the right location. Owners, leave the headaches to us. We'll find your tenants or buyers while you stay at home. We'll even manage your property at your bidding. Anything real estate, come home to Gittins & Gittins Real Estate. Call us at 760-3280 or 747-1220 or visit us at 16 Fifth Street in Woodbrook.
Are you driven, ambitious, and ready to earn? WESN, the content capital, is expanding, and we're looking for dynamic media sales executives to join our team. Sell powerful advertising solutions across television, digital, and social media platforms, and help brands tell their story. If you have strong communication skills, a passion for sales, and the drive to succeed, join WESN today. Send your CV to marketing@wsncc.com or WhatsApp 6861662 and start building your future.
Breast cancer is the most prevalent cancer among women in Trinidad and Tobago, with an incidence rate of 37 per 100,000 population.
Definitely, I can say from when I first started just focus on breast cancer about 3 years ago, is definitely you can see a steep incline and rise.
Yeah.
And I'm generally, I don't have data to quote it, but I think I would like to say that there are more younger patients being diagnosed with breast cancer.
Yeah.
And those are patients under the age of 40. I'm thinking your practice as well, I'm sure that you see and diagnose a lot more patients at a younger age.
Absolutely.
This is 10 Questions. I'm Andy Johnson. The distance from where we should be in the world in going forward on our commitments with climate change.
The effects of climate change that cannot be accounted for, it's called loss and damage. And we're seeing loss and damage happening so much more in this decade and the previous decade.
The principal term there was this question of the correspondent banking issues.
That is why we're trying to build capacity with this country here, Trinidad and Tobago, and other countries in the region. Man
is not showing any signs of stopping or even slowing down. More than half of the forest in Trinidad is already gone.
All the plants and all the animals and all of the nice clean water and fresh air and everything had to be on this planet for humanity to have a chance.
We have small change when it comes to countries that can take decisions, and when they speak, the world listens.
The General Assembly is a very democratic forum. And Trinidad and Tobago has the same vote as Canada, in spite of the obvious difference in size.
The home of Caribbean content is growing, and we welcome you to be a part of the #1 platform for young personalities who are driven to make a positive impact in society. As we continue to reach every corner of Trinidad and Tobago through our daily broadcasts, our social media pages, or through our 75+ digital billboards across the nation, contact us to learn about our competitive rates via marketing at wesncc.com or call us at 628-5835. WESN Content Capital, television with a difference.
I'm back here talking about the WSND Content Capital, and of course, within the news, there have been two, actually, major legal situations. One is an ongoing story. One, coincidentally, came up with regards to Mr. Warner and his extradition matter over alleged corruption with FIFA as the final games of the World Cup was being played. And to speak, to help break down these matters, I am not a lawyer, so we have a lawyer who graciously has volunteered his services to help break down the technical aspects, not here to pronounce or give certain levels of opinion, right? Break down the technical aspects. I mean, yes, he will give his opinion on the technicalities. We have attorney at law Fareed Ali.
How are you doing, Sean? It's a pleasure to be here.
Yes, thanks for joining us. So one of the things that took me by surprise is the ruling that ended the extradition proceedings for Mr. Warner, which at this point, at the very least as a layman, I would say is potentially another example of, well, how long are we going to just have these things dragged out, and to what extent did that contribute to the judge saying enough is enough? Because on some level, I'm actually thinking, yeah, this has gone on way too long. If you had anything concrete, this should have been wrapped up a long time ago, and he should have been extradited. The fact that it's been dragging for so long makes me wonder, what did they not do correct? We know that there was talks about how the Office of the Attorney General at the time was dealing with the matter, what documentation they claimed, but they maybe did not have or could not produce, so what arrangement was promised, but was it promised informally, was it proper? And I guess the unfortunate thing is Mr. Warner, I don't know if he is satisfied with the outcome, but at the very least, in his age, he doesn't have to deal with this hanging over his head. What do you make of this?
What we need to understand, and what the public out there perhaps need to grasp, is that any extradition arrangement is an arrangement between countries. In other words, we have an extradition act that governs how we treat with our citizens. Trinidad and Tobago is a sovereign state, and the citizens that sit under the belt of governance, has constitutional protections. So our government or our judiciary, when they're adjudicating upon an issue, when they have to cast their mind upon whether they should release an individual, and in this case, release Mr. Warner into the care, custody, and control of U.S. Officials, they must ensure that the U.S. are doing so from a position of, well, correctness, if we may put it in very simple language. In other words, a warrant was issued for the arrest of Mr. Warner in May 2015. That warrant having been issued, it meant that Mr. Warner had to surrender to custody in Trinidad and Tobago, and he so did, and bail was granted. When bail was granted, it was a conditional release or relief where he's allowed to enjoy his freedom pending the completion of the extradition proceedings. So let us look at it from this angle. The U.S. are in a position to issue a warrant. They believe that Mr. Warner was involved in corruption, in fraud, and money laundering. That in itself, that is an allegation. That in itself doesn't mean that it's true.
Right.
So our relationship, our extradition arrangement with the U.S. is of such where we have no issue with extraditing, with sending a man or putting him in the care, custody, and control of U.S. officials who answer to charges in the U.S., providing that there are constitutional safeguards in place. So a man's right to life, liberty, security of person, and enjoyment of property under Section 4 of our Constitution, that has to be acknowledged, that has to be respected. A man's right to equal treatment before the law, that has to be guaranteed. Mr. Warner's right to a fair hearing under Section 5.2 of our Constitution, that still stands. Mr. Warner's right to a fair trial, a right to seek legal counsel, a right to be heard, a right to know what the allegations are, that must be guaranteed. So constitutionally, what is in place there? We have to ensure that the Extradition Act that we have formed, that every act ought to be consistent with the Constitution, meaning consistent with our rights under Section 4. Every time Parliament sits, they're always mindful that there are Section 4 rights that exist, that subsist, that they must ensure that this piece of legislation is in tandem with those rights. It doesn't violate it. So when the Extradition Act was formed, it meant that we have a relationship now with Commonwealth countries and any foreign territory, in this case the US. Now, this is the nugget in the matter. For the US to have the benefit of Mr. Warner, the treaty arrangement we have with them must be in sync with our Extradition Act. In other words, it must not be at loggerheads. And if it is at loggerheads in some way, meaning that, loggerheads meaning if there's any conflict in terms of the treaty, or their extradition treaty with us, and the Extradition Act that subsists here in this country, it is the duty of the Attorney General and the Attorney General's office to ensure that constitutional provisions are put in place, or provisions within the treaty are put in place to ensure that our constitutional rights, Mr. Warner's constitutional rights, isn't violated.
But this would have been beforehand, right?
This ought to be beforehand. You cannot extradite the man and then try to put the arrangement in place.
What I'm saying is they should have put these measures, they should have deconflicted these pieces of legislation that need to not be in conflict in order for them to work beforehand. You can't come to a case and be like, oh, I didn't realize we had this issue. Could you then change the law in order to facilitate the extradition?
Well, the spirit of what you're saying is correct. Fundamentally, Mr. Warner is not the first person that the U.S. has had an interest in, and in fact, there are persons who have been extradited in the past. So there's a tendency.
In the recent past, I believe.
Yes. So there's a tendency that once they express an interest in our citizen, and once they issue a warrant from the U.S., that we will in tandem bring the individual before the court and grant bail and allow and then begin the extradition process. Now the extradition process is Mr. Warner has to go before the magistrates court in Trinidad, and they will have to ensure that before they allow him to be extradited, that the correct processes are engaged. In other words, ventilate some of the issues, ensure that there's a basis for this, and that we are embarking on this exercise in proper form. The specialty arrangement, right, that ought to be in place, that specialty arrangement that allows for Mr. Warner, or allows for a person who is the subject of an extradition order to be protected, that arrangement is normally made between the Attorney General and the U.S. officials seeking extradition. In other words, they will say, listen, it's a very straightforward situation here. You must give us guarantee that if we release him, that what you're trying him for is for, and you must name exactly what: fraud, money laundering, corruption, and particulars as to what it is. So you cannot extradite the man, send him up to the U.S., and then they go on a fishing expedition out there now and try to throw the book at him in every possible way. In other words, exactly what is contained in the extradition arrangement and exactly what is contained in the specialty arrangement, the details, the particulars, only that you can try him for, nothing more.
I just want to make the point, because some people might hear specialty arrangement and think, oh, this is an exceptional arrangement. But this is the process.
It's a legal term,
right?
And the specialty arrangement is not special or peculiar to Mr. Warner. It's special and peculiar to any person the U.S. is seeking in terms of extradition.
So this will apply to all of the extraditions, right?
All of the extraditions.
This is not to say that his case was an exception and they need to go outside the norm with a special arrangement to get him out. Because I know there are some people, when they hear that term used in this way, they might not fully appreciate that fact that you're speaking to the actual procedure.
It speaks to the actual procedure, and it applies to anyone. It's not peculiar and unique to Mr. Warner. It's not personal to him. So you or me, if the U.S. is seeking in the morning, wants us, then the Attorney General will entertain the application, and he will look at the details of why they want us there, and he has to ensure that there's a specialty clause in place. And that specialty clause is there to protect our citizen, our national, to ensure that when it is he's sent out there, that they're not sending him here to the gallows. They're not sending him there to be an open target for just anything under the sun.
It's a scapegoat.
Exactly.
So now, what with regards to the specialty arrangements? Because, you know, we got reports on this as it was, you know, I think a couple of years ago, as the situation was in the courts being discussed, what the Attorney General did or did not do or was improper with. What exactly was missing in the equation here with regards to the specialty arrangement for Mr. Warner?
Right. Now, basically, what has happened is, as of March 2023, Mr. Warner made an application to the court to get a copy of the specialty arrangement. He wanted to see what exactly are the terms and the conditions and the provisions and the details of the specialty arrangement. That is a document that physically exists, and that allows for it, and it's appended to the extradition order. And he would be able to see exactly, he would have the assurance of seeing exactly what is the arrangement my Attorney General, whose responsibility it is to look after my constitutional rights, what arrangements he made with the U.S. In relation to my conduct and my conduct out there. Mr. Warner made applications for 10 years trying to get copies of the order, and the Attorney General's office, and the office as represented by Mr. Faris Alwari, Senior Counsel, refused to make that available to him. So, having established the boundary of 2015 to 2023, let's try to straddle backwards a bit. the authority to proceed was another phase in the extradition process that Mr. Alwari piloted when he ascended into office in 2015. If we were to understand how it went, in May of 2015, the People's Partnership was still in government.
Right.
The then Attorney General would have been Gavin Nicholas. The warrant would have been issued in the US in May of 2015. At that point in time, the incumbent government would have been the People's Partnership. The sitting AG would have been Gavin Nicholas. So he would have been brought before the court and granted bail. This is happening under a People's Partnership government, an Attorney General other than Faris Alwari.
Right.
When the PNM ascended into office in 2015, September, by then, Attorney Generals changed. Mr. Alwari sat in the incumbent position as the Attorney General of Trinidad and Tobago, and he gave the authorization to proceed against Mr. Warner. In other words, the extradition proceedings began. They put things in place. In other words, the authorization to proceed simply means that wherever the journey was in relation to the charge being read, bail being granted, in that interim period between when bail was granted in May 2015 and September 2016, Mr. Alwari, in assuming office now, stepped it up again. He gave the authorization to proceed against Mr. Warner, in other words, to have him transferred back to the US. Well, transferred to the US to answer the charges. Mr. Warner, at that stage there, he made an application to see what is the specialty arrangement you have in place to protect me. Because remember I said, and I'm quoting here paragraph 8 of Justice Reed's ruling, it says that specialty is a rule of extradition law that is intended to ensure that a person extradited is not dealt with in the requesting state for any offense other than that for which he was extradited. In other words, Mr. Warner wanted to see this particular document to ensure that if it is he is offered to the US officials, that the specialty clause is in place which protects me from being made to answer the charges outside of that which I am on bail. When it is they place you on bail, it's because there are certain charges, and that now that you've been charged, you have to have a hearing to determine your innocence or your guilt. He doesn't want a situation where now that I'm on bail and I know that I know what I'm going to the US to answer to if my government authorizes that I proceed to go there, that they don't introduce other charges, that it's peculiar and particular to what I have been placed on bail for.
Because potentially it won't just be, oh, well, we'll just throw all these other charges at you and hope it sticks, but it could also potentially draw the process longer. I don't know if they'll try and hold him for longer. You know, you could play games with it, right? And you're just trying to avoid all of those kind of underhanded tactics, I guess you could say.
Right. Now, the Court of Appeal in this particular decision, much is being said of Mr. Alwari in this moment. They're saying that Mr. Warner made very, very strong statements within recent times, having been this situation having been resolved now, where he cannot be offered to the US anymore. He said that how it was maliciously done by Mr. Alwari and the then administration to ensure that his rights weren't protected, and that his rights were violated, and that he be placed in the care and control of US officials to answer the charges. The Justice of Appeal indicated very succinctly that she finds it very, it is odd that you became aware in 2016 that there was no specialty clause within the extradition proceedings. It didn't exist. And at the same time, you have a duty of candor to inform Mr. Warner, so why didn't you not inform him? He was making applications since the authorization to proceed was granted in September 2015 when the PNM ascended into office. He made the application back then that I would like to see the specialty arrangements in place. We are looking at, this is 2015, we're looking at 2023, some 8 years after. He didn't make that application once, twice, thrice. There were hearings at the High Court, there were hearings at the Court of Appeal, and there was a hearing at the Privy Council. And at no point in time did you make the specialty arrangement details available to him. When it is, he recognized that he was unable to get this for such a long period. He began his own quest, meaning that he made an application under the Freedom of Information Act. And it was only then he was able to find out for himself that there was no such clause.
Right.
Now, that created a whole conundrum where it painted the Office of the Attorney General in a very dark space. In other words, it raised questions and raised eyebrows as to what is this? I mean, why it is a standard procedure to have a specialty arrangement in place, and there was none.
And also, this should not be a complex thing that should be difficult, I would imagine, right?
Well, it's a basic standard procedure. It's run of the mill. This is an issue that, if we may put it this way, it's so basic and so textbook that it is not one of those clauses that one would miss. It's a salient feature of any extradition arrangement.
It's like arresting someone and not putting any handcuffs on them.
Well,
yes, you can say. You know, I mean, it's a process that we just, if you're there, you would assume it to be done.
But there was an inquiry. There was an inquiry as to, under Section 8.3 and Section 8.5 of the Extradition Act, it speaks to the need for a specialty arrangement to be in place. And 8.5 speaks to putting a certificate of specialty in place. And in other words, 8.3 and 8.5, specialty arrangement, certificate of specialty, the play on the words is simply this. There are provisions within the Act that allows for that layer of protection for Mr. Warner, and the certificate of specialty speaks to the fact that it exists. What they made available to Mr. Warner was the certificate of specialty. So the certificate of specialty, Mr. Faris Alwari and the Attorney General's office said, listen, we don't have to give you a copy of the actual specialty arrangement. The fact that there's a specialty certificate, which is normally issued once the arrangement is in place, then that is enough. The certificate is just that, a certificate that speaks to the fact that there's an arrangement in place. But you have a certificate stating there is an arrangement in place. The certificate is guaranteeing you that the arrangement is put in place, but you don't know what the arrangement is.
So, I just find it difficult to think that this could have gone all the way and been kept hidden. Because if they don't have an arrangement at some point, now, unless it was the case where, you know, everybody would have acted within the bounds as if one existed and it just never came up. But I just find it very difficult to think that this could have proceeded on and not come up at some point, that the fact that they had no arrangement, and then by extraditing him in such a manner, wouldn't it potentially undermine everything dealing with Mr. Warner and his criminal case moving forward?
But what it does is it deprived Mr. Warner of an opportunity to be vindicated before the court, because he was not resisting extradition. I mean, no one wants to be the subject of an extradition order. Yeah. But at the same time, he doesn't have a say in terms of being extradited. What he would want is that the process is not in any way, that the streams of justice are clean, and that the process, the sacred provisions of the process are obeyed, and the provisions to protect him are there.
I think some people might think, oh, he was fighting tooth and nail to not be extradited.
But and that is far from that.
He was really just, ironically, the reason why he wasn't extradited was not something he did, but rather something the Office of the Attorney General did not do. And it kind of, he didn't have to find some technicality. They're the ones that didn't do the proper procedure. And it caused the thing to take 10 years, 11 years.
Madam Justice Reed her viewing of the fact is she had a decision to make in relation to a specific issue. The specific issue is this. She is saying that when I look at things as it transpired between 2015 to now, my purpose in this thing is to make a ruling in relation to specific points. What Mr. Warner did is with the authorization to proceed, and he went before the then Chief Magistrate Earl Cattle at the Magistrates Court in Port of Spain, she's the one treating with the extradition process. He raised, as is his right, certain issues with that court and saying, listen, I have been trying to get a copy of the specialty arrangements since 2015 to now. I would like the court, this court, to seek some sort of guidance from the High Court as to whether I am entitled to see this arrangement, whether I'm entitled to see the document and the provisions and the terms of it, and whether this ought to be in place before the authorization to proceed is issued. He's saying, I am of the view that this authorization to proceed is faulty. It ought not to have been issued without the specialty clause being in place. And the fact that I'm not being allowed to see it raises suspicions that there is an issue with it. Why withhold it from me? And he's doing that through his attorneys. And he's saying that, oh, I went before the High Court, and I went before the Court of Appeal, and I went before the Privy Council on this same seeking a copy of it. And what Mr. Warner is saying is that the Attorney General's office and Mr. Alwari, being the body incarnate of that office, he's the face of the Attorney General's office. They underline that their practice doesn't allow them to hand over to any person who's the subject of an extradition procedure a copy of the specialty arrangement, that we made available a copy of the certificate of specialty. And they made references. On affidavit, 2 persons offered evidence before the court. And those 2 persons were, one, Mr. David West. He then was the head of the CAU, and subsequent to his time, meaning his successor, after he went to another place, Mr. West, his successor was one Natram Kaulesa. Both of them gave evidence, affidavit evidence, that the practice in the Attorney General's office, or the practice of the CAU is the practice of not making the specialty arrangement provisions and the details of that, meaning the treaty arrangement between the US and Trinidad, available to the subject of the proceedings. So it's not that Mr. Warner was being violated in any way. It's standard procedure for any person who is subject to extradition to not see that agreement. All they get is a copy of the certificate. So their position stood very strongly on, we are not making that available to you, Mr. Warner. We are making the certificate available. So what Justice Reed is saying is, all right, he who is coming before the court, judicial review proceedings is done with candor, right? You have a duty of candor. The duty of candor is simply this. If someone is seeking to have judicially reviewed a decision made by a public body against you, meaning that a citizen of this country who is the subject of a ruling by a public body, in this case the Attorney General's office, then they can seek to judicially review the decision. And the office of the Attorney General has a responsibility to be open and frank with the court. Right? You ought not to try to hoodwink the court or to not be forthright with the court. Someone is seeking redress, Mr. Warner.
Yes.
So when he's seeking judicial review, if it is you did the proper thing and your actions could stand up to scrutiny, then there is no need to try to engage in any sort of sophistry or gymnastics, mental gymnastics or anything of this sort.
Only giving out the certificate?
This is with regard to
how they responded to the court?
Both, right? Because what is happening is the court is saying, but If it is you're not making this specialty arrangement available to him, and you're relying on the fact that you have affidavit evidence from former heads of the CAU, Mr. West and Mr. Natram Gaulesa, who's stating that we are not doing anything different to Mr. Warner as we would do to anybody else. This is our standard procedure, how we operate, how the Attorney General's office operate. This is not something where Mr. Warner is being victimized or being in any way undermined. So despite the fact that both of them said same, they went on to get affidavit evidence from other persons. There was a King's Counsel involved, and they stood before the Privy Council and made representations that the arrangements were put in place and that the provisions exist. And what they presented to the Privy Council was the certificate of specialty, not the specialty arrangement
itself. Yeah.
So the Privy Council, in making a ruling with regard to whether the authority to proceed was legal, right? Because in order to sanction the authority to proceed, things have to be done in Trinidad. It was done. He is saying Mr. Warner is challenging the authority to proceed.
Right.
So when it goes before the Privy Council are looking for certain building blocks. There are certain things that ought to be put in place. So they ask about, what is the extradition treaty about? Is the extradition treaty, the Extradition Act of Trinidad and Tobago, is the Extradition Act of Trinidad and Tobago in line with the treaty that you are entered into with the foreign body, which is the US? In other words, the treaty doesn't violate our Extradition Act in any way, or the provisions of the Act in any way, because if it does, the person who's going to suffer is Mr. Warner. So once the Act and the treaty with the US is in sync with each other, then the authorization to proceed, we could begin that journey. But in order to complete the journey, and in order for the authorization to proceed to be issued, you must ensure that the specialty clause is inside.
I would imagine for the court, it would be one thing for you to say, well, we are not of the practice to give it to the defendants. But it's another thing to say we are not of the practice to give it to the courts, right, because that's two very different things, right? So right, is it that they never were willing to give that document? I mean, I assume the result is that there was no specialty arrangement, right? That, or was there actually one?
When Douglas Mendes, who represented the state at the High Court level, made his submissions, the issue came up with regard to whether there's a specialty arrangement in place. He indicated that there is a specialty certificate, and if it is, if the issue is he's challenging the authorization to proceed, then the only thing that could stand in the way of the authorization to proceed is there being a lack of a certificate of specialty. And he's saying that we have that document and it was disclosed to him, and therefore we can now embark on the authority to proceed. Mr. Warner is insistent that he wants to see the arrangement. They said, sir, that is not going to happen. Now, this is where...
Is there a reason for that, by the way?
Well, he wants to ensure, being a citizen of this country, that if it is he goes out there, yes, that they wouldn't throw the book at him.
No, but what is the reason for it not being disclosed? This is one thing that I don't understand.
The reason for it not being disclosed is simple. We don't disclose those documents to anybody generally. What we disclose is the specialty certificate. What he's asking for is against our practice. We don't make that available to the civilian. He mustn't know those details. Whatever transpires between the Attorney General's office and the US officials is not his business. He might be affected by it, but all he has to be concerned is that the certificate was issued. The little fine print with regard to what lies behind that certificate is not his business. Now, the court is saying it is his business. Karen Reid is saying that you have a duty of candor. This man is challenging the authorization to proceed and the process that you all engaged upon. If it is that is so, then there is nothing wrong. He is not asking for much in order to know what it is, what the arrangement is. How is it hurting the state to reveal to him what the details are? Because he can't change it.
You're right.
He can't be affected, and if it's correct, he can't challenge it.
And it's not going to give him some kind of ammunition or lever to do something underhanded. It is. All he will know in advance is, okay, what he has to defend.
Yes. Now, when John Jeremy assumed the office of the Attorney General, he looked at all of the documents and he reviewed the file. And he would have been able to see, because he's now sitting in the Attorney General's office.
Right.
So everything that Mr. Warner was seeking, he would have to avow his mind to it. He would remember he's now the man in the hot seat.
Yeah, it's his responsibility.
He is his office. The office is now his. And if it is, this issue with Mr. Warner is unresolved. In the same way that Gavin Nicholas passed the buck to Faris Alwari, and then Faris Alwari to Reggie Amor, and now we have John Jeremy. John Jeremy has a responsibility. He can't take for granted that everybody did their work, because he is the person who's going to get his stick in the end.
Mm-hmm.
He looked at it and he viewed with some degree of concern that I am not seeing this specialty arrangement. And how could you give an authorization to proceed? So he writes to Mr. Alwari. Mr. Alwari say, it appears that what you're accusing me of, or what you're suggesting, is that I in some way acted outside of the law. It appears that I may need some sort of legal representation, and am I getting any guarantee from the state that they will pay my legal costs? They will stand the bill for me to have an attorney to represent my interests at this stage. Because the accusation that you're pointing towards me, you're making towards me, the reflection you're making upon me in terms of my course of action, is you're questioning perhaps the legality of it, or you're questioning whether I did the correct thing and whether I acted with malice and not with candor towards Mr. Warner. And you're accusing me of making assurances to the High Court, assurances to the Court of Appeal, and assurances to the Privy Council, and misled them. Now, the reason why he has to answer is because he's the AG. He was the sitting AG for 8 years, and these matters were piloted before these institutions, and he was the face of the office. Ultimately, the man who, the head gets the lash, not the body, meaning he would have a legal team that is acting in the background. He would have staff and institution in place that would be doing the work. But when everything is done, people look towards the head of the AG's office. John Jeremy said, we are not utilizing any state resources to furnish you with any legal team to represent you if this thing goes any further. I am simply asking questions of it. Appears to me, and Jeremy did his homework in terms of he reached out to all the different bodies and saying, am I reading this correct? Are there documents missing? Because with all the specialty clause, I think we have caused Mr. Warner to embark on an exercise from 2015 to now. And we have what we are really doing is violating his rights. Because think about what he lost. Think about his position in the politics. He was a sitting member, an incumbent member of the People's Partnership, sitting in government with a ministry, with control of a ministry. He was told by Kamala Persad, he says, go clear your name and come back. When that fall off between him and her, he boasts, when things weren't so hot with him and the UNC, that he removed 2 prime ministers in terms of Rasdev Pandey and Kamala Persad says. In other words, he brought the People's Partnership to its knees.
Don't get me started on the politics,
the birth of the ILP. So all of that transpired, meaning the whole landscape of our politics was impacted. So what Justice Reed did, and I think it's important that the public understand this, she basically looked at, the justice looked at all that transpired and said, I am of the view that there was a duty of candor and that Mr. Warner was denied that duty. And she says that she doesn't believe that the Attorney General's office and the Attorney General would act with any sort of contempt for Mr. Warner and would willfully and maliciously act in such a capacity. she said that, however, when it is Mr. Warner, after filing the application under the Freedom of Information Act, got information that the specialty clause was not in place, even if we take it at its highest point, meaning from that point in March 2023 to now, right, to now, at no point in time did the Attorney General step forward and say, listen, we are now seeing that there was no specialty clause in place. And did he attempt to clean the waters and clear the streams of justice and say, listen, we want to make it clear that although the clause was not in place, we need to offer an explanation, because this is something that he was seeking for many years, and we gave a guarantee that the clause existed, and they made it, Douglas Mendes said it in a different way. He said that there was a clause, it was personal to Mr. Warner, but it was not unique to Mr. Warner. In other words, Mr. Warner, it's not a play on words, but the language is of such where we could not have embarked on an authorization to proceed unless there existed a certificate of specialty, right? The fact that we acted on the certificate of specialty, hence the authorization to proceed. So the mere fact that it existed, the certificate of specialty, it complied with the Extradition Act under Section 8.5. So when the authorization to proceed was granted, there was no breach in the law. It was personal. The specialty certificate, the certificate of specialty, was personal to Mr. Warner. It was not unique to him, in the sense that, yes, there may not have been a specialty arrangement that expressed the unique circumstances of his arrest and detention, but the specialty certificate, the certificate of specialty, did speak. It wasn't issued just like that. It was issued with Mr. Warner in mind. So in a manner of speaking, we complied with the law. Now that we have seen that there is no such clause, the issue is, did we violate the law in proceeding proceeding this part and in issuing the authorization to proceed, the clause not being in place? What? And he's saying, number one, when we went before the High Court and the Court of Appeal and the Privy Council, the Privy Council, the only concern and focus they had is that the certificate of specialty was there. There was a presumption that you can't put the horse, the cart before the horse. There's a presumption. If you're presenting to me a specialty certificate, there's a presumption that the specialty clause is in place.
Can a certificate legally exist without the specialty clause?
Well, the answer to that is no, it cannot exist without the specialty clause. So hence they're saying that the mere fact that we presented the certificate, that is enough for the courts to go with. The court is guided by the certificate. There's a presumption that the specialty clause was in place if the certificate is there. The relationship between the specialty clause and the certificate is a horse and cart scenario. What we see is the horse, and there's a presumption that the cart is behind the horse. So the High Court is seeing the horse, the specialty certificate, the certificate of specialty. The High Court is saying if it is we see a certificate of specialty, the presumption is that there is a specialty clause. So Reed is saying, I am not casting any aspersions on the office of the the office of the Attorney General. I'm not in any way casting any aspersions on them, nor am I making a finding on Mr. Alwari. She said, for me to make a finding on Mr. Alwari and his actions, I would need to get a lot more information. And my role, having this issue of the authorization to proceed being placed before me and seeking clarification from the 8th Court, from the Magistrates Court, under Section 12 of the Extradition Act, is narrow and basic and straddles strictly to dealing with the authorization to proceed. And I'm saying, for me to address my mind around the authorization to proceed, I have to consider whether the clause existed, whether there's a certificate, and whether the treaty, and meaning the extradition treaty with the US and the extradition treaty with Trinidad, it has been is on all fours, and they all aligned.
So before we run out of time, so I want to move on to the other case, right? Because I think it would be a shame to not speak about it as you're here, because we have this situation now where, I mean, don't necessarily want to speculate onto why it was done. I agree with you. I said yesterday, I believe, one of the issues with Mr. Warner's matter is the fact that he will not actually have his day in court to actually answer to what he's been accused of, and you know people will hold that against him. But it is what it is. I'm not even sure if people care that much about it anymore, to be honest. So with that said, we have the other matter with the preventative detention orders, the ongoing state of emergency, and the case for Hadid's, which I guess you could say in a way might be multiple different sub-legal issues. So what do you want to touch on any time that we have left?
If we were to look at the situation as it pertains to the Hadid's, the issue that the latest ruling reflected was an issue that speaks to whether the detention of these individuals, the legality of it. Mm-hmm. You're accusing individuals of conspiring to kill members of the government and the Prime Minister. That murder is the most serious offense to which an individual could be accused. I mean, anything greater than that would be treason. Right. And they treated it on the same level. Yeah. Now, the PDOs are issued born out of the emergency powers regulations. These regulations are regulations that governs the state of emergency that we currently subsist on. This current state of emergency runs until mid-September of this year, 2026. Right. There were a series of renewals. Every 3 months they renew it. Now, the Hadid's were initially arrested and kept in custody from the 24th of June for a 2-day period. The law allows that if you arrest somebody or you arrest someone, you have to have probable cause and a reasonable basis for the arrest. The Hadid's rights under the Constitution to equal treatment before the law and for the right to life, liberty, security of person, and enjoyment of property. That subsists regardless of their race, their ethnicity, their economic class, status. Everyone out there, from the maxi taxi driver to the Prime Minister, has the same rights. Now, when they were initially arrested, that 2-day period had to be on the basis of they had some factual basis for arresting both of them. Mm-hmm. Now, when they were arrested, what they did is they seized the electronic devices of these individuals. Electronic devices, it was not specified. One could only presume, and not that we are speculating and throwing that speculation in the public space, but electronic devices are just that. I would imagine laptops, cell phones. Yes, tablets. Now, 2 days into their detention, the 2-day detention, the law allows for, under the emergency powers regulations, to extend that time under Section 13(3) of the emergency powers regulation for a further 7 days. And then at the end of that 7 days, under Section 14 of or Regulation 14 of the emergency powers regulation, then you can keep the individual indefinitely. So what is... The Hadid's have been in custody, and right now they are there on the powers arising out of Regulation 14 of the emergency powers regulations. Now, the court ruling was this. They are saying that we have been in custody from the 24th of June and no charge has been laid. Murder, the accusation is there's a conspiracy to murder. That is different from murder. Mm-hmm. I mean, anyone would understand that. If you and I sit to plan out the execution of Ryan, we may have a plan in place that we know he's here from a certain hour and he's leaving at a certain hour, and he likes to go certain places. We would have worked out his whole dynamic.
How
we know exactly when to
it and who will do it and all of those things.
The mere fact that we having a discussion, or any person is having a discussion along those lines, means to say, number one, what we're discussing is criminal action. Right. And what we're discussing is a plan to execute that criminal action. conspiracy to murder involves persons agreeing to murder, and they are agreeing to depart towards achieving that objective. In other words, you just don't kill a man. You have to do it with some sort of science. You don't just kill government officials. You have to do it with some sort of stealth.
But arguably, you don't just say, oh, well, it should be done, or something short like that. It would have a bit more detail. As you say, you're going down the process of thinking this out, planning this out, putting arrangements.
So when the PDO, the preventive detention order was issued, it did not specify the details. There is nothing of evidential value. And not that it is required to put that much detail. It was simply said that they are a threat to national security and they are a threat to public interest. And if it is under regulation 14 of the emergency powers regulation, if someone is a threat to national security or a threat to the public interest, then that individual, the state is entitled to take that individual or those individuals under its care in order to protect the citizens of this country in some way, in this case, the Prime Minister and government officials. Now, let us say at its highest point, and this is where we were, this is where the court ruling stood. They are seeking what we call relief orders or relief in the sense that if it is I am where I am, if it is I am where I am, I'm the subject of a preventive detention order, then you cannot just keep me here and not charge me, or you cannot just keep me here and I cannot challenge whether it was reasonably justifiable. And the argument is that even if it is, you believe that you have the ingredients of the offense, meaning there's a conspiracy or these persons are conspiring with persons to kill, you haven't been able to provide any intelligence or name any source as to where this information is coming from, and you haven't provided the details as to what steps were taken in order to actually achieve this. Because in a very hot-headed way, you and I could get extremely angry about your working conditions here. And you saying to me that, am I ready to beat people in this place? You know, if I had to take off a man's head, I would. Right? Now, that might be normal language when you and I carrying that discussion. That doesn't mean to say you're looking to damage somebody.
I mean, the example I use is, at least in the past, when a parent would basically, let's put it this way. When a child would say, I can't do that, my mother will kill me. We know that the mother is not going to take a knife and start stabbing the child.
Right. No, it's not just the loose language. And one is not trying to marginalize the concerns that the Minister of Homeland Security has. Mm-hmm. He would have intelligence, he would have information. I would imagine Special Branch would have done their background. They would get the information. They're not obligated in law to name their source, and they're not obligated in law to provide details. But the particulars doesn't exist in terms of when they issue the PDO, then they never placed any particulars that could justify the action. Remember the action? All right. Under Section 7 of the Constitution of Trinidad and Tobago, it allows for the state to establish states of emergency, to create states of emergency in this country, and hence we have what we have. And on the basis of that, then you would have the emergency powers regulations operating in tandem with the state of emergency that has been declared. In other words, when the state utilizes the tool that is available to it under Section 7 of the Constitution, the emergency powers regulation are regulations that are put in place to execute its powers under the state of emergency. So the very fact that this state of emergency is a constitutional equivalent, or it finds its constitutional equivalent in Section 7 of the Constitution, means to say that it's a decision made by a state, made by the state, that is affecting an individual, in this case the Hadiths. So therefore they're entitled for the judicial review of the decision to have them detained. And so where we are, to broad brush it and to bring the panorama of all the events together. Currently, they are seeking to judicially review the decision to place them under PDOs, under preventative detention orders.
Right.
They are ultimately seeking to challenge that decision by way of judicial review.
That has gone to the Privy Council? That's what's gone to the
That
Privy
has
Council?
been tabled at this stage.
Oh, okay.
Right? Now, where we are is this. In the interim, pending the decision by the challenge before the challenge to the substantive challenge, meaning the judicial review of the decision to place them there, they are seeking interim relief.
Right.
And the interim relief is, listen, allow us to go home and enjoy the benefit and the warmth of our children, the ability to work, earn income, the ability to enjoy the warmth of my bed, my home. In other words, my right to life, liberty, security of person, enjoyment of property. Allow me to benefit from that. But while I'm sitting here in a filthy cell 9x5 with tutu on the wall, with rat and cockroach running all over the place, and having to use a common bath with other prisoners, I'm not saying they're doing it together, but it's not your personal space. Everybody likes to enjoy what is theirs, what they built for themselves, and the benefits of that. So they didn't want to have to be sitting in jail, and they still don't. So they made an application for interim relief. When it went before the High Court, before Justice C. Prasad, he's saying, listen, if you figure that your human rights and your rights under the Constitution are being violated, when you get that judicial review hearing, and there is a determination, meaning the substantive matter, then you could seek redress, you could seek damages in the terms of money. Their thing is, damages in terms of money doesn't allow me the benefit allow me the redress on the reputational damage that I have suffered, because everybody's looking at them and looking at them, and it's not rose-tinted lenses. They're saying, ah, boy, they grab a big fish. So they're being viewed in a negative way, and it's affecting their business their brand.
I will say this, though. I am under the impression that a lot of people, when they were initially arrested, was, white collar, big fish. And then when the actual reason for the PDO came out, a lot of people started getting a little bit more skeptical about this PDO, you know. It's like, and I made the comment, you are the first person to potentially arrest someone, a high-powered individual, a high society, a high-income individual. And usually, the general public will be like, yes, go after corruption, but somehow you've managed to not get public opinion with you. So a case ironically can be made that reputational damage hasn't been quite that bad, except Carl has already dropped Blue Waters as a supplier. So there is already, you know, an objective financial loss, and I don't know what the justification for Caribbean Airlines was, and that could be added to any potential complaint down the line.
But in looking at things, even if one would imagine, and this is an aside from where we are in terms of the discussion, there ought to be some sort of contractual relationship with Carl. So they can possibly explore a breach of contractual relations, and they have a legitimate expectation in law that if I have a contract, then I am to supply you with X amount of water, and as a result of that supply, I ought to be paid. Now, let's shift back to where we are. The High Court, there was a High Court ruling by Justice C. Prasad. He's indicating that he's not going to go behind the information provided by the Minister of Homeland Security, which is that he has intelligence that there's a plot to assassinate the Prime Minister and to kill public officials, meaning ministers of the government. He's saying that I'm not going to explore that. Those details you see that you wish the Minister of Homeland Security present as part of the particulars of the preventative detention order, I am not going to in any way seek to cause that to be placed or address my mind or wrong that. In other words, what he's saying is I have to accept it for what it is. As a member, as a judge sitting and making a decision, I am not going to question why those particulars aren't there. Right. I have to trust that if the executive is saying that they have intelligence, that there's a plot to kill the PM and a plot to kill ministers of government, then they have reason for forming that view, and there's a strict separation of powers in terms of the judiciary, the executive, and the legislature in this country. So the judiciary cannot be caused now to go now and look behind the fact that those particulars weren't presented, and then rule that you be granted your interim relief and release. What if it is, as a judge, there is a tendency for the High Court and for the judiciary to not interfere in emergency powers regulations and issues arising from that, and trust that the executive has a basis for doing what they do. Now, when it came before the Court of Appeal, and this is the nugget, this is where things really evolve. The Court of Appeal, through the sitting judges Rajkumar, Dina Moore, and Joan Charles, their position was simply this. If the particulars aren't there, we have the view that you have not been able to advance your situation, meaning advance any particulars to the Hadiths between the 24th of June to the latter part of July, meaning an entire month. They were not even interviewed in the interim. The particulars that you provided on the 24th of June and arising under the emergency powers regulations as of the 27th of June haven't been made available to them. We have to acknowledge as a Court of Appeal that these people have rights under Section 4A of the Constitution. Under Section 5.2, they have guarantees that their right to life, liberty, security of person, enjoyment of property, equal treatment before the law, that under Section 5.2, that they have a right to a fair hearing, they have a right to bail, they have a right to know what the charges against them are. Now, what would have been said is that under Regulation 16 of the Emergency Powers Regulation, a person is not entitled to bail. That what you could do is you could go before a tribunal and you can argue your case, but in terms of bail, they are not entitled to bail. So they can't go the route of, the reason why it is they're seeking interim relief is that they cannot get bail. And also they can't get bail because they have not been charged for anything. Bail only applies when it is a charge has been laid. So legally speaking, the Court of Appeal is saying, you know what, when we look at this, we have a responsibility to make findings. We are looking at the fact that these rights exist under Section 4. We are looking at the constitutional things in place in terms of Section 5.2 of the Constitution that speaks to these rights ought to follow, ought to be guaranteed, but not only guaranteed, that they are entitled to due process. And we are not seeing anything in terms of the details, any progress being made. In other words, they went so far to say, even if it is that they have the resources to execute this conspiracy, they are not the only persons in this country with the resources to execute a conspiracy of this nature.
Right.
And if it is you have intelligence and you cannot reveal the intelligence, well, at least show how you are justifiably holding them. Because right now there's no progress, there's no interview, there's no details being provided, and they are seeking review of the decision. Now, what CPASAT said in the High Court is, there are allegations that they have to answer to, and allow the substantive process to be treated before the court. And they can sit it out where they are in terms of in prison. And when it is the substantive issues are treated with, if it cannot be proven, they will be released.
Right.
So there's no need for interim relief. But there's a medical issue with Mr. Hadid. There's also an issue with the aunt, and there's also an issue.
I don't know if she's party to all of that, but there is apparently some health concerns with her,
right.
yes.
So,
and she is significantly older than the other two.
Right. So fundamentally, what the court did is that the court ordered that they be released.
Right.
That they be released, and when the court gives an order, the order is not conditional. Now, what Gerald Ramdeen did, when it is the court ordered their release, he immediately made an oral application before the said panel that he's seeking a stay of the order to have them released, so he can put things in place. We putting things in place to be there. They have to put a police post outside of their house, and then naturally they will have to put institutional machinery in place. I would imagine. Give police directions as to you ought to be there. They'll have to understand what is their function in terms of a house arrest. That sort of dynamic has to be ironed out. In other words, for them to be under house arrest at their residence, under police care, things have to be physically put in place. And policy-wise, I would imagine the Commission has some work to do. And in terms of deploying officers and everything that comes with it. So the court is saying, listen, we gave an order to have them released, and they ought to be released. You have the opportunity now to go and put things in place, and then they will be under house arrest. We cannot, and we are not going to give you any stay on this order to relieve them, meaning that we are not, a stay basically is, we are not going to put a condition in place that they will be released in 6 hours, which gives you a window period in which to go and put your house in order, put a police post, put policies in place, put officers in place. You don't get a window period. There's no honeymoon period in terms of time. They ought to be released forthwith. Now, naturally, the judiciary they can give an order, and the order is forwarded to the prison where they at. And then the commissioner will have to see, well, we have a court order here, you know. So he will be acting in violation of that order if he doesn't obey the order. What happened is, Mr. Ramdeen made the oral application, and when he was told that he will not be granted that stay, he indicated further that apart from putting things in place like that, meaning the police and the boot and so on, and putting the situation in place for the house arrest, he needs the opportunity to file and make an application for a conditional release. Conditional relief, meaning that, and let us put that in lay language, he wants to challenge the decision of the Court of Appeal. So he has to make an application to the Privy Council, right? And the application to the Privy Council, he wants a stay. He is seeking a stay so he could put things in place for the application. So he has to file a record of the appeal. He has to contact the Privy Council and have the matter tabled for hearing, and he has to pay certain fees, because when you apply to the Privy Council, there is a financial cost involved. And when he does that, then they will give him a date. So when they blanked him, and lay language, when he was denied, what they did is, what Mr. Gerald Ramdeen did is he now made another application. Yeah. And he went before another panel. Yes. And the panel would have been not the same 3 judges that made the decision to have them released. It would have been another 3. And that 3, in hearing the application, they would have ruled that they will wait. We are putting a stay on their release, and the Hadiths will have to wait until the Privy Council, the judicial review proceeding.
Which the thing is, so I have at least the statement for reasoning here. The prejudice to the public interest would outweigh the prejudice arising from their continued detention, if it's proven to be true, the conspiracy, for what was expected to be a relatively short period while the Privy Council considers the appeal. I find it interesting that the justification is because, well, the appeal to the Privy Council is going to be a short period. Meanwhile, part of the initial ruling was, well, this thing seemingly is going nowhere. So it frames the whole timing of criminal proceedings in a whole new light, or maybe highlights the fact that, hey, the status quo of things taking too long for criminal proceedings is kind of ridiculous. But I just find that it's interesting how both sides essentially had an argument of, well, the timing is being unreasonable, or is reasonable now that it's shorter. But with regards to I guess you could say, with this case though, I do wonder if it could have further reaching considerations, because one of the things that I speculated on was the fact that, well, if they got relief, why can't other people under detention orders get similar relief that have not been charged, obviously?
Well, there's a simple explanation for this. Lawyers don't work for plums and linseeds.
No, but some of these detained individuals are assumed to be men of means. However, they achieve those means that's a separate issue. So at least not all of them would not have the means to be represented.
Providing
by a
that
lawyer.
they could afford the appeals, and they could afford to go before the Court of Appeal, and they could retain counsel. There's nothing that prevents them from following a similar path. But there were, and outside of the law, there has been, in the court of public opinion, persons putting in the public space that race, ethnicity, and class is waving its head in this.
I would also argue people are assuming politics because people will assume certain groups support certain parties and not others, and thus you have a political divide on the issue.
Right. So there will always be speculation, and that speculation will not dissipate, because we live in a society where persons carry the view that race, class, ethnicity counts in this country. Color and a person's status and who you know matters. There is nothing in what has transpired actually, in reality, lends itself to that, to there being any substance to that notion. In the court of public opinion, people on the street say a lot of things. If you understand how this thing works, and we've explained it with great detail, you are the subject of a detention order. You, as an individual, any person who is the subject of a detention order out there, they are free to challenge whether the detention was justifiable. And it's not a question that you cannot in any way challenge your detention. You go before a tribunal of three, and before the tribunal of three, they will have to examine the circumstances of your arrest, the circumstances of your detention, the factual basis upon which you've been detained and arrested, and then the Minister of Homeland Security, through his office, would have to present enough information that will satisfy the tribunal that this person isn't being kept here, and there isn't any basis for it. So this is not a situation where somebody could conduct themselves as a dictator and operate outside of what is reasonably justifiable. The regulations are born out of what is in place in terms of Section 7 of the Constitution, and those regulations can be challenged.
Well, here's the thing, because as we're running out of time, I understand what you're saying. If anything, I thought that perhaps the judges were erring on the side of caution here, because there might be precedents that will affect things down the line. But that said, I also said, well, the judges should not necessarily be swayed by the court of public opinion, right? You can't allow for that. I do feel that public opinion is not necessarily on the ruling, but rather it's about the situation before the ruling. You have a state of emergency, you have preventative detention orders, right? And it's been building from the very beginning, because people are just anticipating the lawsuits from the previous detention orders that have not led to charges, right? And there's, I think, a certain level of discomfort that the population might have that also stems from matters to do with the Samru shooting and how that was managed, not the case itself, but the communication around the case. So now you have a situation where the public has discontent over mostly a public communications aspect of multiple criminal justice matters. And they're building and they're building and they're building. And then now the court is going to rule on something that is already unpopular and is just kind of getting flack, collateral damage, not because of what necessarily they did themselves, but just because the proximity to a governance matter, public relations, communications matter, on how you're managing the public's expectations through all of these things and the utilization of emergency powers. Because the thing with the state of emergency, I believe one of the judges or the first Court of Appeal ruling said the tribunal, because it is not binding on the minister, is not sufficient redress or sufficient pathway to seek redress. And in fact, there's a report this morning that says they recommended that the continued detention was not necessary or expedient in the public interest. However, the review has not reached a conclusion because the minister has asked the tribunal to reopen the process. That was 3 days ago, apparently, when this recommendation went to the minister. So that has nothing to do with the Court of Appeal in the sense of how it affects their work, how the rest of the judiciary does their work. I think it really comes down to the Court of Public Opinion having questions about the state of emergency and how it's been handled. And unfortunately, well, this is the case, I guess, where we're now seeing it's not just that you get detained and you complain to the press. Now we're seeing actual court matters being moved forward on the case. And people are potentially just, it's going to be unfairly guilt by association, in a sense.
Right. I think what the public needs to understand is, and the Court of Appeal didn't overrule itself. Mm-hmm. The second tribunal of judges, and I'm using the word tribunal, meaning the second core of judges that ruled that the relief granted by the Court of Appeal, meaning the first 3 judges,
right.
They're putting a stay on that relief. In no way did they, is it to be viewed that there's a conflicting opinion or one just overrule the other. The Minister of Homeland Security and the state is entitled to seek a stay. A stay of the execution is a legal remedy available. And there has to be a basis for seeking a stay. And the basis is, if it is, there is to be a judicial review ruling, substantive ruling on the issue. And they are seeking to be relieved, to be released into the care of themselves, with whatever conditions. The concern would be, what if it is that the intelligence that they have, meaning the state, Minister of Homeland Security, is correct? And what if it is now you have the Prime Minister assassinated and ministers assassinated? Then it would be viewed that the Court of Appeal acted in such a way that their actions in ordering their release placed these members of the executive in harm's way. So one has to look at it from this point of view. The public interest and the interest of national security for the people of Trinidad and Tobago trumps the individual interests of the Hadids. In other words, there's a greater good here. The citizens of this country elected into office a PM, or elected into office a government, and there is a PM who is the head of that government, and the elected officials that form this government. So therefore, in our democracy, if these persons were to be threatened, the state ought to do all it can to protect these individuals. And that is where the issue of national security comes in. The interest of the longevity and the longevity and the stability of our democracy is of concern. And the face of that democracy is our public officials. So we cannot, in our efforts to look at the individual interests of the persons who are the subject of the PDO, put them ahead of the public good.
You see, the problem is, whether rightfully or wrongfully, whether fairly or unfairly, there's 2 aspects of public interest in the matter, and that's not just, yes, regardless of how popular or unpopular our elected official is, violence against them that will lead to their harm or death is a very destabilizing thing that should not be tolerated. The problem is the public interest is also with regards to I wouldn't necessarily say legality, but the ethics behind what we find ourselves in right now. And I guess part of it is whether you could, because one will probably assume the majority of the population cannot necessarily relate to the Hadids on multiple levels, but it is still a citizen challenging the system, which many members of the public, not necessarily well, with the protest with Caracili, some people were saying tear down the whole criminal justice system. But I think the general public is more along the lines of, well, we have questions, right? And I guess part of it very much comes down to what is the actual case, which we'll have to wait and see it come to its fruition. Will they be charged? What is the evidence? I don't like the fact that they haven't been charged, and I don't like the fact that, unless, something comes up, I don't know if it'll likely that they will be charged. If that happens, then this whole thing might turn into a rather fine mess. If they are charged, of course, it will continue, and, we'll see how it plays out, and there might be a version where even if they're found innocent, the state's actions were reasonable, but we have to wait and see on that. But until then, unfortunately, the public officials are kind of paying the price of bad communication from matters that even preceded it. And public relations is not fair. The court of public opinion is not fair. And I think this is just one of those things where you kind of have to accept that, not necessarily be unduly influenced by it to make crazy decisions just to appease the public, but kind of understand how to communicate with them moving forward. Because just telling the people, well, you can't say certain things at this point is a hard pill to swallow, because it's not just on this matter alone. It would be built up from before. So it's a very weird intersection of the legal requirements and correct procedure and objectivity in the law with how do you try to manage this population. Because they're going to see, yeah, the public interest is, what's going on with these PDOs? These PDOs don't make sense, because there are people who don't believe in the conspiracy. They just don't believe it. And whether or not that is factual, that is unfortunately a consequence of a criminal justice system that has eroded on some level trust in itself.
I think the media has a big part to play in how things are perceived. What is being carried in the newsprint is what we may look at in some ways unfounded information. We don't have all the details and all the facts in this matter. We don't know where the intelligence came from. We don't know what is the nature of the intelligence. We cannot be told that. And we cannot be told that and the details of same, because if we were to do that, then things may swing in a different direction. What if it is people begin to take now the side of the state in this? Because, so in other words, what you're doing is you're trying the individuals in a public space and not in the hallowed halls of the court, where there are protections in place to ensure that their reputation doesn't suffer, or where there are protections in place to protect both sides, meaning the state and the...
I think this is a situation where I understand where, I hope I don't get this analogy wrong, but there are situations where you think you're not taking a side, but even when not taking a side, you're in a way taking a side. Because people will interpret, oh, they don't want to let them out. They're probably guilty. Like at this point, unless you expedite things, and the whole emergency powers kind of makes things a lot more difficult to, that lack of transparency, which it is the nature of the emergency powers, the preventive detention orders, conspiracy to murder a prime minister, like a lot of things are contributing to that, right? That is difficult to get around. You're in a position now where they're going to either look guilty or look innocent. There's no way to make it look objective where, well, because people don't accept innocent until proven guilty. They either want to believe that the individual is innocent or guilty. And there's almost no way to not prejudice the public. Psychologically, they'll pick one and the other. And I guess we just have to figure out either how to educate the public better, or what is the least harmful direction to go. One could argue that this is the least harmful direction to go because you're still at least following objective procedure. But that's the thing. I think this matter highlights the fact that they're going to be prejudiced one way or the other. There's no middle ground for the public to say, as much as you might say that, yes, the media headlines are fueling it to some extent, But part of the problem is the ongoing narrative of what's going on in the country kind of is leading people to that point naturally. And the media can't just say, oh, well, you all are all just wrong without reason. And the government is not, at least from my perspective, providing sufficient enough reason, because a lot of it is their bad public communication, which is then leaving people like the Law Association and the Court of Appeal judges and a whole sort of other people that just want to, the DPP on the previous matter that we spoke about, that are just there to do their job objectively as possible, but now they're subject to the court of public opinion, whether they want to or not, unfortunately.
Let's wait and see where things go. I believe that we have to continue to trust the institutions of the state. We have to trust the judiciary will do what it has to do. We have to trust that the government is not there to oppress the people, but because we have a parliament and an opposition in place that are keeping them to account.
First of all, emergency powers kind of cuts into that. Second of all, I don't know if we, and I will say this about this opposition and the last opposition, I don't know if they're really doing a job of holding either this government or the previous government to account, right? And this goes back to a weak opposition that helps nobody. So it's similar to the SOE tribunal. They're just there to talk, right? And I'm not even saying they should get more power. Even in the capacity of just there to talk, I don't know if they are doing their job sufficiently. Part of that is because of what led them to lose the election that they have not rehabilitated themselves from. But if the argument is the opposition is there to be a check on the government, at least right now, I'm not secure on that. Right? They could get there. They could get there. It's not that the individuals I think are that bad, but the circumstances of the opposition I don't think is in a good place to say that that's going to be sufficient for the public to assuage their fears.
We have to continue to believe that the course of justice, however long it may seem, that it always reaps the reward to the benefit, and it redounds to the benefit of the citizens. The institutions of the state are there to protect all citizens. It's there to protect the Hadids, it's there to protect all the other persons, regardless of their race, ethnicity, class, if those are factors that feel that they are being ill-treated in some way. I don't think the public should take out of this issue that race, ethnicity, and class is a factor in the Hadid's detention. If that is so, then it's entirely wrong.
I mean, there have been the flip side. They talk about how they've been recently treated in the prisons and what privileges that they may have gotten that other detainees have not gotten. That I don't know how proven that is, but that is also out there, which on some level does not paint them in a positive light, I would argue, for the general public. So there is that as well. Yeah, and people will point to socioeconomic, race, and class with regards to that. I don't think, oh, conspiracy to murder, yeah, but you're all non-violent. You all could get special privileges.
You see, this is what I'm saying. When it is the individual from Mr. Logie, it's in the public space. When Mr. Logie came out and made certain remarks, he is saying he is making that remark from the basis of the association, the prison officers association. In other words, in his capacity as a union representative and the voice of the prison officers, he's saying that when these privileges are extended to particular persons, and other prisoners in the system is seeing that it's being handed over to individuals, particular individuals, and not others. Meaning that he went so far to say that prisoners are complaining that they are entitled to an hour's hearing every day. But as it stands right now, they're not getting the hour's hearing. And it's not just a question of time, it's not getting any hearing. But yet still, this particular individual is getting to come out of his cell and come out and enjoy the benefits of watching television and all of that. I felt that was in poor taste to see such a thing. Because the public is digesting what he says as truth. We haven't had communication officially from the prison that confirmed or denied that indeed happened. we are presuming that if it is he says that he's talking from a position of truth. He has an interest to look after, as he made very clear. He's looking after the interests of the officers, to which he is a member of the union that represents their interests. And if it is, or the association that is so if that association is putting into the public space information, one would imagine that what they ought to have done is to have communication with the commissioner's office and let an official statement come out. One that they would have been privy to, meaning that the association is privy to, meaning we are looking at it and saying, listen, we have to ensure that public confidence in the prison authority and public confidence in the way prisoners are treated with at the prison is not impacted by putting out there that persons of a certain distinction are being treated in a particular way to the discrimination of others. Or, to put it differently, that's how not everybody who is in the prison is being treated on the equal platform. There are some animals out there that are more equal than others. And that in itself, and this is where the media comes in, because when the media now takes what is being said, and when he's utilizing social media to put that out there, then it impacts on negatively how the system is viewed. It shows the prison as having its own rules.
You see, the problem is...
Now, it does have its own rules there, but it also works in tandem with the national rules.
The trick is the media can't ignore it, and depending on how they try to frame it, they themselves could be guilty of trying to influence the situation. I do agree with you that usually I prefer if the media on news reporting would try to ascertain more contextual framework,
and be more investigative.
Well, I mean, budget is part of it, but also willingness for other people to speak. Because usually you want to get comment from the other side, and more often than not, the other side don't want to talk, right? That's one of the tricks.
But they can't.
Well, so then now, if the media doesn't report it, that's being viewed as you're covering it up. If they try to interject their opinion, I am an opinion show, I'm different. If a news reporter tries to inject their opinion to change the narrative framework, then that could be, looked at as being unprofessional behavior. It's very tricky, the landscape of news reporting. I wouldn't say that all reporters are unbiased, and sometimes the bias is subconscious, so you're not even necessarily aware that you have it. And I'm not saying that I'm not potentially going to fall for that either, but it is a lot trickier than you think, in the sense of it's not that it's easy to avoid the unethical behavior. There's arguments that, depending on your intention, both directions for the wrong intention could be unethical, and it's to sort that out that is tricky, because unlike the law, you don't have an objective measure for each individual, for each instance. You could only kind of hope to reason it out subjectively. Maybe there's a patent example in history that will help guide you. So, because I'll say this, I have different criticisms for the media, and I guess the long and short is the media industry, there is a lot of room for improvement in multiple areas. I guess part of the problem is budget, as many things. All right, so we were straying away from the law per se and getting into the court of public opinion, which I don't know if as a legal expert as yourself, if that is necessarily your cup of tea. But thanks for joining us for breaking down the cases, because I think it did help inform me, particularly with factual situation with Mr. Warner's case, to better understand that, but to better understand the procedures of the Court of Appeal, particularly with regards to this case, because I did find it kind of odd that, yes, to me, in my layman's mind, it was a reversal, but then you're right, it's not a reversal, just saying, well, it's going to the Privy Council, technically that's going to be the final decision, so we don't need to technically get this thing out right now, but it'll be interesting to see where this case goes, and I don't know if, hopefully you'll be able to talk to us about it as it continues to mature.
We'll see how things unfold, and it's a pleasure being here, and let's see where it goes. Let's see what decisions are made.
I actually fear that it will just like silently die, and we will hear nothing. And at some point they'll be released, and that'll be the end of it. Similar to the Ayla situation, similar to the Brent Thomas situation, where we don't hear anything. So that's I guess that's now my default concern for any high-profile case, that it just kind of dies a silent death, and we don't actually, the public, get a resolution to how it was managed.
It's healthy for democracy that we have issues like this that arise from time to time, because whatever is put in the public space, the issues arise, the issues are dealt with, they're treated with. The courts and the institutions, the states get involved, and there is no violence. So we can't see similar manifestations around the world like that. So we take for granted what we have here.
Yes, I'll say this. That's my fear. That at some point our ease of doing violence and our political rhetoric will 2 + 2 = 5, and we're not going to like the outcome. Unfortunately, we're going to get some crazy man is going to make some crazy decision, and we're going to regret it, right? We're going to wish, oh, maybe we shouldn't have said all these things politically and have all of these horrible comments from various party supporters on the comment sections of videos and so on and so on. But we'll see. So far, God is a Trinity. Whether we deserve him to be or not, God is a Trinity. Let's just take the comment quick. This is not going to be long. I don't know if you could just take it. I'm confused who you're talking about. It sounds like the PNM. All your banter is giving a good definition of the PNM. Thanks. It would be helpful if you actually said what banter and whose. I don't know if it's something Mr. Lee said, something I said before he came on, something I said after he came on, but I have no idea what it's for. So, what I said before. Look, the current government gets the majority of the criticism because they're in government. But as Mr. Ali brought up, the opposition, I don't necessarily see the opposition operating from a position of strength, so it is what it is. All right, we're way over time, so thanks to the commenter. Anyway, I guess I will always be viewed as having bias despite the fact that I criticize everybody. Mr. Ali, again, thanks for joining me once again. Folks, this is talking about the WSN Content Capital. Remind you, have a good day, stay safe, remember your allegiance to the Republic and to each other. Don't forget, it's nice to be nice. We'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.
WESN.
Good morning and welcome back to Dollars and Cents. Now, this is a show where I try to talk or have conversations on issues related around personal finance, risk management, and all surrounding areas of